Soft music begins, slow, hopeful tones. In a galaxy filled with war, greed, and endless struggle, a small blue planet sent its children to the stars. They didn't arrive with mighty ships or powerful weapons. Their technology was simple, their voices humble. And yet, they carried something far stronger than any army. They carried kindness, hope, and the courage to care, even for strangers. This is the story of those humans. The story of how they changed hearts instead of conquering worlds. The story of how compassion became their greatest weapon. Because in the end, humanity's true power was never in their hands, but in their hearts. I am not human. I am a watcher from a people who live between stars. My name will not fit your mouth, so call me Keth. When I was young, my elders sent me to the blue world with clouds. They warned me to keep my distance. They said humans love tools more than life and win with sharp metal and bright fire. I believed them. I thought power was only engines and guns. My ship hid in the shadow of a small moon. I saw greenlands, rivers, and slow storms. I listened to the noise humans sent into space. Most was music and jokes and small news. The sounds were soft. They did not match my elders' fear. I waited for the drum of war. I heard laughter, weather, and love. On the 9th day, a cargo ship from another species drifted into the system with a broken drive. The hull wore a bright scar. Heat leaked. Water ran low. I pinged and heard a weak pulse. Survivors were few. My order said to observe, not to act. The humans did not wait. They heard the same call and their network woke at once. Stations, shipyards, schools, and homes spoke together. A web formed. 3 human craft left their world. None were warships. One was an old science boat with dented panels. One was a tug with thick arms for pushing rocks. One was a tiny courier owned by a man named Dara. He was not a soldier. He carried mail and spare parts, and he kept a family photo above his console. I am close, he said. I can reach them first. Stay with me on the link. The damaged ship turned slowly like a whale with a hook. Its drive would not light. Its air was sour. The captain spoke broken trade code and prayer. He said he could not stop the spin. The human tug answered in a calm voice. Breathe. Count with me. We will match your spin. We will bring you home. The science boat calculated vectors. Armin's little ship slid forward, small in the dark. Many species have rescue laws. But here is what I saw and could not forget. The humans did not wait for orders or rank. They opened a public channel and shared ideas. A pilot said, if we push wrong, we will crack the hull. A student at a ground station said, soft dock with the tug and use the courier as countermass. A child asked, do they have music? Another voice said, later, first we stop the spin. No one mocked the child. No one told the student to be silent. The tug made contact. The hull groaned. Armin fired a weak thruster and became a weight on the other side. For a moment, all 3 ships moved as one body. The damaged ship slowed. Someone on the human link cried out. Someone else laughed and then cried too. The captain counted with the tug. 1, 2, 3. The spin stopped on 4. Silence came, then many voices said, we have you. The next problem was heat. The cargo ship had been too hot and then too cold. The science boat released a cloud of tiny drones with reflective panels and small heaters. They wrapped the machines. It worked. Air grew cleaner. Water began to hum through pipes. The captain stopped whispering prayers and asked their names. You saved my crew, he said. Who are you? The science boat listed names and then added, we are the ones nearest. That is enough. I wrote in my log. Humans help first and ask later. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was low gravity. It was not. When the 3 ships reached the human station, no one spoke of trophies or glory. They spoke of sleep and warm towels. Beds were set so no one would wake alone. A medic took the smallest survivor's hand and told a silly joke. The joke was not funny to me, but the child laughed anyway, a tired sound like water. Something in me changed. After the rescue, I expected the humans to turn back to their jobs. Instead, they asked about the broken drive. They asked to see the damage. They did not blame the crew. They wanted to learn why it failed so others could be helped later. Armand sat with the captain and drew on a napkin. A pipe, a valve, a seal. If you had a spare seal, he said, you would have lived without fear. We will print them and send them to your route. No payment, the captain tried to argue. Armand pushed the napkin across the table and smiled in a tired way that said the matter was closed. I sent a report to my elders. I wrote, "The humans have clever drones and printers and ships, but their true power is how they sit beside fear and say, 'We are here.' Their strength is the way they share air, heat, plans, jokes, and the weight of hard hours. They even share tears." My elders replied with one line. "Continue observation. Do not approach." I watched the world breathe. I thought of the voices: a student, a pilot, a child by the sea, a man with a family photo. None were ordered to act. None waited for someone more important. They moved as if a cord inside them had been plucked. We help. I began to see that their greatest power was not a weapon, but a choice made in quiet hours with no praise. Later, in war and peace, I would remember this rescue. The shiny blankets, the soup and lemon, the way laughter returned after a long dark. But that night I wrote one more line in my log. "Beware the species that treats strangers like neighbors. They will change every map." The first war I saw them fight was not of their making. It began far beyond their world, where an empire older than their oceans sought to expand again. We called them the Vorth. Their fleets were strong, their rule cold, their logic simple. Those who cannot resist, serve. When the Vorth scouts came to the human colonies, they expected silence and fear. They sent a message that had worked for 1,000 worlds. Surrender, and live as subjects. But humans did not surrender. They answered with confusion first, then anger, then something else I had never seen before. Unity born not of command, but of love for each other. The Vorth took one colony, a small world named Ceres Prime. It was peaceful, green, unarmed. They burned its communication towers to set an example. I thought the humans would give up then. I had seen so many young species do the same. But I was wrong again. On the dark side of Luna Station, a group of miners, engineers, and old freighter captains met in a low room that smelled of coffee and oil. They were not soldiers. They had no uniform. One said, "We can't fight their ships." Another said, "Then we fight their fear." They built no new weapons. They built networks. Every human ship, no matter how small, carried signals. They learned the patterns of the Vorth drives, the rhythm of their patrols. They shared everything: coordinates, maps, stories, even jokes about the enemy's ugly helmets. Their courage grew like a web. The Vorth called it chaos. I called it the beginning of something new. I watched from orbit as the first act of defiance unfolded. Freighter, painted yellow, slow, and full of old cargo, entered the path of a Vorth cruiser. The Vorth hailed them. The humans answered with music. It was a song made of drums and strings. I did not understand the words, but they burned like the sun. The cruiser demanded surrender. The freighter kept singing and then exploded, not from weapons, but from releasing a field of chaff and mirrors. The sensors of the Vorth ship went blind. In that moment, 20 smaller human ships slipped past and rescued hundreds from Ceres Prime's surface. Not one soldier, not one admiral, just people. When the Vorth discovered what happened, they began to destroy cities, and still, humanity refused to yield. Farmers hid refugees in their barns. Teachers turned classrooms into hospitals. Musicians broadcast codes through melodies. Every streetlight, every satellite, every heart became part of the resistance. I recorded it all. My elders told me, observe only. Do not get involved. But I was already involved, not by action, but by wonder. The Vorth could not understand how humans kept standing. Their logic said fear breaks all, but humans do not run on logic alone. They run on stories, the story of their ancestors, of hope, of never giving up because someone else still needs them. One night, I listened to a broadcast from a hidden station called Beacon 9. A woman's voice spoke in many languages at once, repeating one message: "We are still here. If you can hear this, you are not alone. Help someone. Then tell them to help someone else." The message spread faster than light. Entire worlds repeated it. Even some alien colonies under the Vorth joined the humans quietly. Not because of their weapons. They had few, but because of their spirit. Months turned to years. The Vorth grew tired. Their empire was not used to enemies who refused to die quietly. They tried to break humanity's will by taking Earth itself. They arrived with a fleet so large the sky burned red for 3 days. Cities fell. Oceans boiled, and still, humanity fought. But again, not with only guns. When power grids failed, they built windmills. When medicine ran out, they shared herbs and water. When bombs fell, they dug each other out with bare hands. I saw an old woman give her only coat to a wounded soldier, saying, "You must live. The world still needs dreamers. I do not cry. My species does not cry." But my vision blurred that day. In time, the Vorth left. Not because humanity destroyed them, but because humanity changed them. Some of their soldiers refused to keep fighting. They had seen something greater than command: compassion. The war ended not with a treaty, but with a whisper, "Enough." And humanity began to rebuild, not in rage, not for revenge. They built hospitals first, then schools, then gardens on the ruins. In my report I wrote, "The humans have no emperor, no hive, no shared blood. Yet they fight as one. Their secret is not dominance, it is devotion. They protect each other not because they must, but because they choose to." When I sent that report, the council laughed. They said I was infected with sentimental contagion, but I knew better. That night I looked at Earth from orbit. Half of it still burned. Yet even from space, I saw lights. Tiny fires of rebuilding, of life returning. It was then I realized the truth. Humanity's greatest power was not their weapons. It was the light they refused to let die. When the war ended, silence filled the stars. The kind of silence that feels heavy, not peaceful, but full of ghosts. From my ship above the blue world, I watched smoke drift over cities, oceans glowing faintly from falling debris. Earth was wounded, yet still alive. Most species after such a war fall into despair. They stop building, stop dreaming. They wait for someone else to fix what is broken, but not the humans. They began to move even before the fires cooled. There were no great leaders shouting orders. There were just people, neighbors, strangers, children, walking through ash with buckets of water and scraps of bread. They shared what little they had, even when hunger pressed against their ribs. I landed secretly on the far side of a ruined continent to watch them closer. Everywhere I looked, they rebuilt, not because it was easy, but because stopping was harder for them. A group of young humans worked beside a broken river. They carried stones and wood to build a bridge. Their hands bled, but they laughed. One said, "We'll make it better than before." Another replied, "We'll make it stronger." I asked a question in their tongue. Careful to hide my face in a hood. Why build again? Why not leave this world and start new somewhere else? The tallest boy smiled through dust and said, "Because this is home. If we don't fix it, who will?" That answer stayed in me. So simple, so human. Across the system, other colonies followed the same path. Mars opened its green domes to refugees. Luna turned its old mines into shelters. Even the smallest outposts sent power and food to each other. No one demanded payment. No one claimed to rule. They built together. One of the Vorth soldiers, a deserter named Iral, found his way to Earth's surface. He had come expecting revenge. Instead, he found mercy. Humans fed him, clothed him, gave him a bed near the river camp. He could not understand it. "I was your enemy," he said. A woman tending his wounds only smiled and answered, "You were hungry? Now you're not. That's enough." Iral began to help rebuild too. He taught the children how to fix old machines. He planted seeds. He never left again. Word spread. Other species heard the stories, that humans forgave their enemies, that they shared their fields, that they rebuilt not just their cities but hope itself. Soon, ships from distant worlds began to visit. They came expecting to trade for technology or weapons. Instead, they found open hands and lessons in cooperation. I sent another report to my people. I wrote, "Humans rebuild faster than any known race. They are driven by something beyond logic, a need to make beauty from ruin. Their strength lies not in conquest, but in connection." My council sent back silence. Perhaps they were afraid that I admired the humans too much. Perhaps they were right, for I did admire them. Watched a festival in one of their surviving cities. It was the first since the war. Children danced around broken statues now wrapped in flowers. Musicians played instruments built from scrap metal and old pipes. An old man stood before a crowd and said, "We cannot forget our dead, but we can honor them by living better." Everyone bowed their heads. Then one by one they began to cheer, not for victory, but for life. In that moment I understood that humanity's greatest power was not only hope, it was memory. They remember everything, the pain, the joy, the loss, and instead of letting those memories poison them, they use them to grow. Later I traveled to the ruins of an old library. Humans were rebuilding it stone by stone. Inside I saw them sorting through burned pages. One girl held up a half-destroyed book and said softly, "We can copy what's left. If we save even one story, the past lives. That is how humans fight death, not with swords, but with remembrance. Where others see ashes, they see lessons. Where others see endings, they see beginnings." I left the library that day with a strange feeling, pride. Not my own, but theirs. It felt contagious. As months turned to years, their world healed. Grass grew over the battlefields. Birds nested in ruined towers. Children played where soldiers once fell. And still, humans looked upward. They spoke of rebuilding the colonies, of exploring again, not for war, but for understanding. They named their new fleet the Lightborn. Its mission, to seek, to learn, to help, not to conquer. And when they launched the first ship, the crew gathered in silence before takeoff. One of them said, "Let's make sure no one else ever stands alone in the dark again." That line reached across every frequency. It was broadcast to all known worlds. Even I heard it deep in my bones. In my final note that year, I wrote, "The humans are not rebuilding a planet. They are rebuilding meaning. Their hands make machines, but their hearts make futures." And as I drifted away from Earth, watching its scars fade beneath clouds, I thought to myself, perhaps this is what true power looks like. Not domination, not fear, but the will to begin again. And humanity, I knew then, would begin again forever. Years passed. The wounds of Earth healed, and the stars grew close again. Humanity had rebuilt itself, but that was not enough for them. They looked outward once more, not with fleets of war, but with ships filled with tools, seeds, and songs. They called these new ships the Reachers. Their mission was simple, to reach anyone, anywhere who needed help. They carried no weapons, but they carried something stronger. Engineers, doctors, farmers, teachers, and dreamers. I followed them. I could not help myself. I had watched them through war and ruin. Now I wanted to see what they would do with peace. The first world they visited was Althea 9, a planet broken by volcanic storms. Its people, the Lithari, were ancient and proud, but almost gone. Their cities were buried in ash, their rivers full of fire. No one else dared to go near, but the humans landed anyway, when the Lithari asked, "What do you want from us?" The human leader, a woman with dark skin and bright eyes, answered, "Nothing. We came to help you stand again." The Lithari did not believe her at first. They had seen too many conquerors dressed as saviors, but the humans did not ask for gold or territory. They asked for names. They wanted to know every word of the Lithari language so they could rebuild signs, songs, and stories properly. "Your language is part of your strength," the humans said. "We will help you keep it alive." And they did. They built shelters, cleaned rivers, planted crops that could grow in the new soil, but most of all, they listened. When a Lithari elder spoke of the lost music of her people, humans built instruments from metal scraps to help her play again. When she wept, They wept too. Soon the Lithari began to sing again, not old war chants, but songs of healing. For the first time in centuries, the mountains echoed with life. From world to world, the Reachers traveled. On dry moons, they built wells. On icy stations, they repaired air systems. They never stayed long, and they never asked for thanks. They simply said, "Pass it on." I recorded thousands of such missions. To the scholars of my home world, I wrote, "Humans have found a way to make strength from kindness. They move through the galaxy leaving gardens where others leave scars. But still, my people did not understand. They said kindness is weakness. I used to believe that, too, until I saw what kindness can build. One day, a human ship received a distress call from deep space. A station was dying. No air, no heat, no power. It belonged to the very empire that had once tried to destroy them, the Vorth. The humans didn't hesitate. Their commander simply said, "Plot a course." When they arrived, they found only 20 Vorth left, frozen and terrified. The humans patched the hull, shared food, warmed the rooms with their own body heat until the systems came back online. The Vorth captain, old and ashamed, said quietly, "Why? We were your enemies," the human replied. "Once, but not today. Today you need help. That's all that matters." For the first time in my long life, I saw a Vorth cry. When the humans left, they gave the captain a small metal plate engraved with words from one of their old Earth languages. "We heal the wounds we once received." The captain held it as if it were gold. Soon, more species joined the Reachers, the Lithari, the Vorth, and even wanderers like me. We learned to build and grow the human way, together. It was strange for me at first, to work beside beings so different from myself. But humanity's greatest trick is to make strangers feel like family. They taught us how to share tasks, how to laugh at mistakes, how to dream as one, and in time, something miraculous happened. The galaxy began to change. Planets that had been silent for centuries began to speak to each other again. Trade replaced raids, friendship replaced fear, and at the heart of it all was humanity, the species that once nearly destroyed itself, now teaching others how to live. I still remember the day I stood on a rebuilt world, looking at a statue the Lithari made for their human friends. It showed a human hand holding a small seed. At the base were carved words translated into many tongues. They did not come to rule the stars. They came to make them bloom. I touched the cold stone and thought about how wrong we had all been about them. We thought power meant control, but humans had shown us a different kind of power, one that grows instead of conquers, that mends instead of breaks. When I returned to my people, I told them what I had seen. Some listened, some laughed, but a few, the younger ones, began to ask questions. "What if we tried what the humans do?" they asked. "What if our strength could also heal?" It was then I realized humanity's influence was already spreading, not through force or empire, but through example. Before I left again, a human captain gave me a small journal. Inside were blank pages and a single note. "Write what you learn. Someone will need it someday." I keep that book still, though I have filled it with stories. Stories of humans turning ruins into homes, enemies into friends, darkness into dawn. They have no throne, no single flag, no perfect wisdom, but they have something better: the courage to keep trying, no matter how many times the world ends. And as I drift among the stars once more, I find myself smiling, because I finally understand humanity's greatest power was never their weapons. It was the way they taught the universe to hope again. The years after the Reachers spread through the stars were quiet, but not empty. Worlds healed, alliances formed, and old fears began to fade. For a while, it seemed the galaxy had finally learned peace. But peace, I discovered, is never the end of a story. It is only a pause before the next question. What will you do with it? And that question came sooner than anyone expected, far beyond the known routes. A dying star birthed something strange, a storm of dark matter and light. It grew, fed by energy, and soon began to swallow nearby systems. At first, no one understood what it was. Some called it a weapon, others a curse. But one truth became clear. If it kept expanding, it would consume hundreds of worlds, human and alien alike. The Council of Worlds gathered to decide what to do. I sat among them as an observer, though by now I felt more human in heart than most of my kind. The scientists said, "We can build a containment field, but it will take every reactor we have." The general said, "We must destroy it before it reaches us." And one Vorth commander, scarred by old wars, growled, "Better to lose a few systems than to risk our entire civilization." But a human woman stood and said, "Every world matters. Every life matters. We will not sacrifice the few for the many." Her name was Captain Lara Holt, a descendant of the Reachers. Her words divided the council. Many called her foolish, but she did not argue. She simply said, "If you will not help, humanity will go alone." Within a week, hundreds of human ships set course for the dying star. Farmers became pilots. Engineers became rescuers. Even children recorded messages to be sent into the dark for comfort. I followed them, as I always had. When we arrived, the sight was beyond words. A vast sphere of swirling black and red. Devouring asteroids like crumbs, sensors failed. Time seemed to bend, and yet the humans didn't retreat. They began building, not weapons, but light towers. Each tower shone with energy drawn from the ship's own core. The plan was simple and impossible. Link the towers into a ring strong enough to slow the storm's growth, but the cost was clear. Each ship that gave its power would die. Still, no one turned away. A young pilot named Mara laughed as she worked. "If this is how I go," she said, "at least I'll leave the stars brighter." Her commander nodded. "That's the spirit that built everything we are." The first ring formed after 7 days, the second after 15. By the 30th day, the storm began to shrink, but the ships were failing. One by one, they went silent, their lights fading into the glow. When it was nearly done, the last tower overloaded. Captain Holt gave the order no one wanted to hear. "Evacuate the outer ring." "I'll finish the sequence," the others protested. "You won't survive!" She smiled faintly. "That's fine. Humanity will." I watched from my shuttle as her ship moved into the storm's heart. Its lights pulsed once, twice, then vanished, and then silence. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the storm began to fade. The dark light dimmed, curling in on itself like smoke. The sensors cleared. The star stabilized. The galaxy was safe. We searched for her ship for weeks, but found nothing, only a single data signal, repeating endlessly in an old Earth language. "If someone finds this, remember we were here. We faced the dark, and we did not run." That message spread across every known world. Even those who had called her foolish bowed their heads. They built monuments not to her death, but to her choice, the choice to save everyone, even those who would not have done the same. Later, when I returned to Earth, I visited a small school built beside the ocean. Children were learning about the storm, drawing pictures of light rings in the sky. One small boy raised his hand and asked his teacher, "Why did Captain Holt help people who didn't help her?" The teacher smiled and said, "Because she remembered who we are." The class fell silent for a moment. Then the boy whispered, "I want to be like her." And I thought, that is how humanity never dies. Not through bloodlines, not through power, but through memory and example. Every act of kindness becomes a seed, and every seed grows into another hand ready to help. When I sent my report this time, I wrote only one line: "The humans have done it again. They turned sacrifice into salvation." But even that line felt too small, because it was not just Captain Holt who saved the galaxy. It was all of them. Every human who carried her belief that no life was too small, no world too far. Their ships were gone, But their light remained, drifting through the void like a promise. Years later, we began to see strange phenomena in the night sky. Small, faint lights near the edge of the storm's remains. Scientists said it was energy release. The poets said it was the souls of the Reachers, still building bridges among the stars. I preferred the poet's answer, because every time I looked at those lights, I felt what I always felt when I thought of humans, that strange, burning certainty that no matter how dark the universe becomes, they will find a way to bring the dawn again. The storm had ended, but its echo lived on. In the silence that followed, the galaxy stood still, as if holding its breath. Worlds that once feared each other now watched the same empty space where Captain Holt's ship had vanished. They waited for the next command, but none came, and that, I think, was the miracle, because when no one told them what to do, they all chose to do good anyway. It started small. On a distant moon once ruled by the Vorth, a young engineer built a small garden from melted snow and old scrap. She called it the Holt Grove, and planted seeds that humans had gifted to her people years before. Her message to the stars was simple: we grow what they began. Soon, other worlds followed. On the frozen plains of Nethra, miners carved words into the ice. We remember the light. On Lethari Prime, children learned human songs before they learned to read. And in the deep halls of the Vorth Empire, a place once filled with orders and fear, a statue was raised. It showed not a conqueror, but a rescuer, holding a light in both hands. The plaque read, "In all known languages, power is not what you take, it is what you give." I returned to Earth again after many years. It was no longer just a blue world. It had become a living symbol, a place where all species could walk without armor or rank. The great cities had been rebuilt, not of metal, but of glass and green. Gardens climbed the towers. Rivers ran through streets. Everywhere I looked, there were faces: human, Vorth, Lethari, my own kind, all working together. No flags, no borders, just hands, tools, and laughter. At the heart of the capital stood a hall called the Circle of Dawn. Inside, the names of every species were carved in stone, and in the center was a single quote from the first Reacher captain. "We do not travel the stars to rule them. We travel to remind them they belong to each other." I stood there a long time, feeling small and proud all at once. This was no empire. It was something rarer, a family of worlds. Then, something unexpected happened. The Council of Worlds met again. The same group that had once argued about the storm, but this time, there were no generals shouting. There were farmers, healers, artists, people of every kind. They had gathered not to fight, but to share ideas. One of them, a young Vorth scientist, stood and said, "We have followed humanity's path, but it is not enough to copy them. We must continue what they started, together." A Lethari elder replied, "What will we call it?" The room was silent for a moment, until a human child, yes, a child, said from the back, "Call it the Rebirth Project." And that name stayed. The Rebirth Project became a movement. Across the galaxy, ships once built for war were turned into flying. Gardens and schools, old battlefields became forests. Derelict stations became libraries. Everywhere, the idea spread that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of care. And though humanity never claimed ownership of this new age, everyone knew where it had begun. I saw old soldiers of the Vorth wearing small patches on their uniforms, a circle of light crossed by a single line. When I asked what it meant, one smiled and said, "It's the mark of the Reachers, those who give more than they take." For me, it was strange. My own people had always believed strength came from isolation, from keeping ourselves pure and untouched. But as I traveled through these reborn worlds, I saw something different, something powerful. When humans mixed with others, they did not erase differences. They celebrated them. They created music that no single race could have written. They designed cities shaped by many minds. Not one vision. It was messy, yes, sometimes loud, sometimes chaotic, but it was alive. The galaxy was learning humanity's secret, that perfection is not harmony through control, but harmony through acceptance. One evening, on a world called Solara, I attended a gathering under a sky filled with 2 moons. There were humans, Lithari, and a dozen species I did not recognize. They were telling stories, old ones, new ones, funny ones. When it was my turn, I hesitated. I had spent my life as an observer, not a participant, but a young human smiled and said, "Everyone has a story. That's what keeps the stars bright." So I told them. I told them of the first time I saw a human rescue a dying ship. I told them of the war, of the rebuilding, of Captain Holt's sacrifice. When I finished, no one clapped. They simply sat in silence for a moment. Then one Lithari child whispered, "They must have been beautiful." I nodded. They still are. As the night ended, I looked up at the stars, so many, so bright, and I realized something. Humanity's power had spread far beyond their bodies or their ships. It had become an idea, one that lived inside everyone who dared to hope. It was no longer just their story. It was ours. In my next report, though by then I no longer sent it to anyone, I wrote, "The humans did not conquer the galaxy. They taught it to dream again. Their greatest power was never their weapons. It was the ability to plant light in the hearts of others, until the universe itself began to glow. And for the first time in my long life, I felt peace. Centuries have passed since I first saw them. The stars have changed. The maps I once memorized no longer match what fills the sky. Worlds have risen and fallen. Names have been forgotten, and yet, everywhere I go, I still find traces of them, the humans, not always in body, for many have faded into the long rhythm of time, scattered among the stars. But in spirit, in the quiet habits of kindness, in the bridges still standing between worlds, in the laughter that greets strangers, there they live. I travel now not as an observer, but as a pilgrim. My ship, old and slow, carries no weapons, only tools and a small library. Inside that library are stories, human stories, collected from 1,000 worlds. Some are simple tales of love or courage. Others are great histories of sacrifice and hope. Together they form a pattern like starlight across the dark. I once thought history was written in stone and steel, but humanity taught me it is written in memory. On the planet Myron, I met a group of children, half Vorth, half human by blood. They wore bright ribbons around their wrists and sang a song that drifted across the hills. I asked what it meant. A small girl smiled up at me and said, "It's about the people who brought us the sun." When I asked who she meant, she said simply, "The Reachers." I did not correct her, for to them, Reacher no longer meant human. It meant anyone who brings light into the dark. That is what humanity had become, not a species, but an idea. On another world, I visited a museum made of crystal and wind. It was built over the ruins of an ancient city that humans had once helped rebuild. Inside, there was only one exhibit, a single worn object sealed behind glass. A napkin. On it, drawn in fading ink, was a sketch of a pipe and a valve. Below it, a note. "If you had a spare seal, you would have lived without fear. We will print them and send them to your route. No payment." It was Armandara's drawing, the man who had once helped a dying ship in the very first days of my journey. The curator, an old Lithari woman, told me the museum was dedicated not to him, but to the moment he chose to help. She said, "We built this place to remind us that a single act of care can echo through 1,000 years." I left that museum in silence, my throat tight. It was as if time itself whispered, "This is what they meant to leave behind." Now even the stars seem to remember them. There are constellations named after their deeds, the Bridge of Holt, the Reacher's Hand, the Circle of Dawn. Each one tells a story, a spark of their endless will to begin again. When ships pass through dangerous space, They send an old human signal, a pattern of 3 slow lights followed by 1 long beam. It means we are here. We are not afraid. No one remembers where it started. But I do. I remember everything. Sometimes young explorers ask me, what were they really like, the humans? I tell them the truth. They were flawed. They argued. They failed often. They were stubborn, noisy, and reckless. But they never stopped caring. They never stopped believing that things could be better. And that, I say, is why they changed everything. In my old age, I find myself back where it all began, orbiting the blue world that first taught me wonder. Earth. It is not the same as it was. The continents have shifted. The cities gleam like jewels. But the spirit is the same. I walk through a park where many species gather. Children chase each other under trees that glow with soft light. A fountain in the center bears an inscription carved in a dozen tongues. We are the builders of tomorrow, not its rulers. People touch it for luck before leaving the planet. Some don't even know it's a human phrase. But it doesn't matter. The meaning lives on. As the twin moons rise, I take out my old journal, the one Captain Holt's crew gave me long ago. There's only 1 page left. I look at the stars and I begin to write. I have traveled across galaxies and watched empires fade. I have seen weapons that could tear planets apart and hearts that could heal them again. But nothing compares to the quiet power of humanity. They taught us that courage is not in destruction but in compassion. They showed us that the smallest act of hope can ignite the darkest sky. They reminded us that we are all in some way human. I close the book. Above me, the constellations shimmer like the eyes of old friends. And as my ship drifts once more into the great silence between stars, I whisper the words I once feared to believe. Humanity's greatest power was never their weapons. It was their heart, and the stars, in their ancient way, seemed to whisper back, we remember. In the end, humanity left behind no empire, no throne, only light, in hearts, in stories, in the stars. They proved that strength is not in force, but in compassion, not in destruction, but in creation. Their message still echoes across the universe. Help one another, believe again, and never lose hope. Because even when the darkness comes, their light still shines. Remember, humanity's greatest power was never their weapons. It was their heart.